Okay, welcome back. This is the next video in my series on World Chess Championship blunders, and we've moved on 2 years now from the rematch between Botvinnik and Tal in 1961, and it's now the 1963 match between Botvinnik and Petrosian. I think I've mentioned before that it's a bit of a lean patch for really interesting, juicy blunders. However, for completeness, we will cover all the matches, and it's just like a tour of the World Chess Championship. So first thing to look at is the Wikipedia page. Let me switch across to the capture screen. Here is the match 1963 Botvinnik version. You can see the pictures there, and you can see, we'll look at the chart later, you can see it underneath. Very comfortable win by Petrosian in the end, and Botvinnik chose not to compete in any cycles after this one. So what we might do is just scroll down. There was obviously the interzonals back in those days, with you can see that Tal and Keres were seeded in from the previous cycle, and then Fischer, Geller, Petrosian, Korchnoi, Filipenko all qualified. And here is the candidates, and you can see that the three Russians way up top. Petrosian just won by half a point against Keres and Geller, 17.5 to 17. There was a key match which Keres lost against Benko. So otherwise, Keres might finally have had his chance to challenge for the World Chess Championship, which he never did. This candidate's Rusar was embroiled in the Fischer complaints about possible collusion by the Russian players, and there's different versions of collusion and responsibility and so on. Actually, they did change the candidate system to elimination matches after this. That's the background to the match, and now let's go across to what we've got there in the chart. On the top right is the game score, and you can see, strangely enough, Petrosian kind of blundered in the first game, and Botvinnik thought, oh, here we go again. But after that, you can see Petrosian in the ring just moved fairly comfortably. We can see there were blunders in game 1, which we'll look at, game 14, which we'll look at, and then I'm going to skip the one in 19 because it wasn't so clearly a particularly bad blunder. And even the two games we're looking at are not going to be that dramatic, but the game 14 rook endgame is pretty interesting, so we're going to spend a little bit of time. Okay, so let's have a look at this game, game 1, pretty quickly. In this position, it's fairly balanced, dramatic going on, and then Petrosian played b4, which is a really strange move, because we'll just sort of look at a few lines. Just shatters White's king position. Take en passant, White takes d3, and then it's not the exchange of knights, it's actually the knight hopping on to f4. Pin down to e file means that the knight can't be taken. We're attacking the pawn on h3, and in many cases we're threatening a fork on d3. So when you exchange, and kind of all the lines you look at, that's kind of the stuff which happens, right? So let's have a look at the game continuation, which is queen h2. Queen d2 was supposedly better. And now there are two moves here. A c5 is what was played, but I might just sort of just to demonstrate sort of why this was a poor move. We'll just go on another knight to c3, just to move out of the way. Crash through on e3 square. You can see that that's a typical continuation, just loses. And the game continuation was black played c5, just opening up more lines, putting pressure on 4 square. But actually moving queen again, and c4 was supposedly a blunder. Anyway, just look at this continuation, and obviously the queen was no longer holding h3. Take that with check. Game doesn't get universal. Continue. Got queen to f6. Ready to break through on f3. Back to f4 check. Still can't be taken because of the pin on the e file, but that's what happened. Sort of desperate measures here. Is you can see the continuation there. You even take with the knight. There's a mass exchange on e2. At the end of that, bishop's going to drop, and black is going to be a clear piece up. Okay, so let's move on to game number 14, which is, as you can see here, it's a rook endgame. I've moved to the key position in the game. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't find any analysis about this game. I believe Botvinnik wrote a book on the match, So I found it a bit difficult to sort of work my way through this. So basically what I've done is I've just done computer lines. It's obviously got a few too many pawns for me to use the table base, just to get a sense of, you can see on about move 55, Trojan played rook f2, which is a losing move. Now, I ran the engine on this for a while. There's only one drawing move, which is kind of interesting. And I just thought we'll go through a few different lines just to see what the problem is here. You can see that the issue is that white has a very advanced d-pawn, d6, king's in front, and the black king is not in front of the pawn. So that's where the whole issue comes here, that black really has to do something pretty good to stop the pawn. And of course white has another passed pawn over here if you need to. Okay, so let's just go through the game continuation first. Trojan played rook f2, and let's just see what's wrong with that. King c8, so threatening to advance the pawn through, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, let's have a quick look what happened in the game. So rook takes f4, and this is perhaps what Trojan missed. I don't know if that's the wrong thing. Maybe Trojan thought he was losing anyway, because now we're going to check. We're then going to advance the pawn through after the king is moved, and any checks blocked by on the 7th rank. So that's one tactic we have to be aware of, giving the king a hiding square. So that was rook takes f4 was played. Better continuations, rook c2 check, which is a logical thing, you know, annoy the white king. Well, obviously the white king has to go back in front of the pawn, still threatening to advance the pawn. And then continuation might be king f6, d7, king f5, do a check. Black finally gets the f pawn. And now this is actually like routine position. By that check on the 5th rank, white has built his bridge and would be able to promote his pawn. Okay, so that's the, we'll go back to this position here. That's continuous. That's when black plays the line rook f2 to grab the pawn. Now, you can see here, I've put a lot of lines in just to see what sort of alternatives are there, right? What's another one which makes a lot of sense? Rook to a d2 makes sense to sort of get behind the white pawn. So let's go to that line, rook d2. So there's the computer line. So now let's have a look what happens. Same sort of thing, king c7, king e6. Okay, so now we've got enough pressure on the pawn. Rook e3 check. We're able to force the black king away. He's doing rook c2 check, king d8, rook 2. I think the problem here, you can just see that white is going to use his extra pawn to move a pawn at some stage, and black can't do very much. Let's go back to the middle position. What's another line which makes sense? Holding the white king on the c file also makes sense. So let's do that move. Let's go rook to c4. So the white king can't kind of get out. Now, I mean, I guess there's a few lines which are winning. Let's just go for a typical line which the computer gives. Probably the idea is just have a look. It's a short side, so checking won't work. And then now the pawn's going to go through again. Too many pawns. Can't stop them all. Right? And if we go back to this position here, then the other threat is obviously to push this pawn and open up the black king from the side as well. Right? So let's say the computer lines I'd looked at, let's say rook f2 was played in the game, was losing. So holding the d pawn, rook d2, rook c4, all these lines didn't really do very much. So let's look at the two, maybe the more interesting ones. What about, well, if we push our pawn, it just gets taken, right? So let's go to that. That's interesting. We take it. So now the position looks a little bit more resolved, but now I think the problem is that because black's on the short side, he's not going to be able to defend the advance of the white d pawn. Okay, so that's that line, and then the final one is the drawing line. Let's see why the drawing line. I looked at this a couple of lines. King f6. Okay, we threaten to advance the pawn. I can't do much about that, so we go rook d2 behind it, d7. So now black just leaves the d pawn for a second. Let's just have a look at a few. There's got a few lines here to look at. It's very interesting the fact this is a draw. Got a very surprising, actually. I mean, let's say one possible king c7, and then the only defense here is just the check, and you go back behind. Okay, so that stops that. There's really no avoiding that. I mean, obviously, you could potentially get checked away and then possibly move the rook up there, but it didn't work. Okay, so let's go back to this position here. What about running the other side into there? Variation, isn't it? Going to be checked away. You end up this situation, which is kind of weird. So therefore, running with the king is not going to help. Okay, so we've got two other lines to look at then. One of them is, let's have a look at rook a5 check. Now this stage we take the pawn, and once again the king can't really escape, but maybe we create more counterplay with our second pawn. Well, now black does the same thing. Actually, h3 suggested, so that pawn's obviously quite threatening. Rook 5, 2, rook c1, got to stop that. Rook c2. That's a nice tactic. So that's, I haven't gone through all the lines. I think this may deserve another sort of closer analysis video on this rook endgame. But you can see the defensive technique was to basically make a beeline for this pawn and then advance that pawn. The rook would be behind, holding that pawn. This a pawn is a bit too slow compared to black's h pawn. No, is that a blunder? No, it's not a blunder, but it did actually lose Petrosian the game, so just had to put that in there because actually there weren't too many other particularly bad moves in this match. Great. Okay, well, thanks a lot for watching. As you know, Botvinnik did not have a right of a rematch, so that the next tournament we'll see is the candidates, and Spassky wins that and challenges Petrosian for the World Championship in 1966. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much for watching.